Welcome to Just to Know You, the podcast that interviews regular people at SAES and finds out they are far from regular.
That's right. I'm your host, Darian Batten.
And I'm Angela Kerskaden.
Let's get started.
All right. Well, it's awesome to have you here, Mr. Jacobson. First question, how did your journey begin?
My journey overseas began pretty early. I guess it began in 1971 when I was born. I was born in Thailand. My parents were working in Thailand, doing work for the United States government. And so that's where I was born. And until I went back to the United States for high school, in boarding school, that was the first time I lived what would be considered kind of full time in the United States. So was kind of international from a young age. My parents moved to Saudi Arabia, working in Saudi Aramco in 1975. So I was 3, just about to turn 4 when we moved at the corner of I believe it was Holmes and 3rd Street is where our house was. The Darian Hills did not exist at all. And so that's kind of what started. I've always been an international child. In fact, probably the most exotic thing that I've felt that I've done was living in the United States when I went to university in North Carolina, where I had no experience with. That felt like a real adventure for me. But growing up in Saudi Arabia felt that was normal. That's what all my friends did too. So that's what felt normal.
How do you think that has impacted your worldview as it's seemingly the place that you are connected to through passport and through documents and really that you're associated with is not the place that is deemed, quote unquote, your home?
Yeah.
How does that shape how you view home, how you view the world and things of that nature?
Yeah, so third culture kids, when I first heard that term after I became an educator, really resonated. And I was like, aha, yes, that I experience all of those things. And I think one of the things, when I think about friends that I made in high school or in university who had these really deep, kind of well-established senses of their roots and where their home is, centered on a physical place, which was not the case with me. Even though I ended up coming back here to work, that's not the norm. There are a certain number of people who do come back after going through the school here, but the norm, of course, is not. And at the time, when I left in 1986 was when I graduated the 9th grade from Saudi Aramco schools. Then it was known that no one comes back. To get into Saudi Arabia was very difficult. So there were no tourist visas. Visitor visas were very difficult to get, and you had to have like a very clear, immediate family sponsor. And so everyone knew that the point at which your family separated from Aramco, you were never coming back. And so everyone just sort of knew that. There also were not the same local high school options. So all of the people I was growing up with, we knew that after 9th grade, we were all going to scatter and go our different ways. And I remain in contact with some people. But even then, when we were growing up here, everyone was just really clear on this is not anyone's forever home as expatriate employees here. And so I think that's one of the things is that when I think of home, it's around people. It's, where, my family happens to be gathered, and it's not connected to a physical place. There's none of that sense of roots. And I think for my siblings as well, that's pretty well evident because, we ended up going all over the globe in different job roles. But none of us went back to both of my parents. They came from small town Wisconsin. So they had that growing up. And that's right where they went back to when they left Aramco. But none of us did. We got all over the globe. And for a while, my parents tried to sort of follow us around a little bit and stay close. But we kept moving. So they ended up just going back to Wisconsin and settling down. So I think that's the biggest one is when I think of home. it is around family, where family happens to be at that moment. And it's not connected to a physical, it's not connected to a physical place. That's always something that always fascinated me growing up and even now.
Oh, that's so interesting. I didn't know that you were a third culture kid. When initially you went to university, did you go into education right away, or did you kind of find your way into it? And what brought you to your educational path?
My initial aspiration was to be an astronaut, and I had to set that aside pretty early. And then engineering was what grabbed me. I loved the idea of building and solving things, and I think the one of the things, even though the movie came out a little bit later, but it sort of captured the essence of why engineering grabbed me, is there's the movie Apollo 13 about the mission to the moon, and they have this mishap, and you've got the astronauts up in space, but then this ground team, and they have to figure out how to get this crew back. And there's a scene in the movie where they've got a challenge of the device to remove carbon dioxide from the air is damaged, and so that's going to be fatal if they can't resolve it. And so they know exactly everything that's in the spacecraft, and they bring it in and they dump it in front of the engineers, and they say, we've got 10 hours or whatever to use this to get this thing done. And I remember seeing that, saying, that is amazing. Like, that is what I would love to do. And so I had this kind of romanticized idea about engineering, and numbers and science, was always something that was pretty straightforward, and I enjoyed in school. So I ended up going into engineering school as my first piece, and I even worked just a year out of college in some engineering type jobs. But while I was in college, for summer, the same school that I went to as a student, so I had lots of connections there, they would run a summer school program. And in the summers, I would go and work in that summer school program. So that was sort of my entry onto that side. And by the time I was a senior in college, they were just giving me the keys to the van that had a trailer full of canoes, and I was running the outdoor discovery program, which was just that my summers were the highlight of my year. And so after that foray out of college, the economy wasn't great, and the reality of the work I was doing did not match that intensity and creativity of the Apollo 13 movie. And so I ended up calling up the school I had both gone to and then had worked in the summers just to explore options. And they did have a spot as a math teacher for me. And so I jumped into there. I did not have a teaching certification. It was a private school, so that wasn't required. So it was a good thing I had worked there, because they kind of were taking a chance on me. But I think I was kind of a known quantity for them. So it paid off. And then it was on the first day of new staff orientation that I met my future wife, Crystal Jacobs. And so that's what kind of started that journey. And education agreed with me, and I stuck with it and ended up going back into university and getting my teaching certificate. And that's how that journey started. But engineering was kind of my first love and was my first trajectory. But it was those summers that were the highlight of my year that drew me into education.
How do you think that engineering perspective still exists in the way that you view education today? Does it still linger, or have you completely forsaken your first love in your role that you have now?
No, I think I still find ways to do that. I love to tinker, and so that's one of my outlets. I think back, that was maybe 5-6 years ago. My daughter and I built a 3D printer kind of from scratch, which was a lot of fun. About half the time was spent building it. We had plans. It wasn't like we were inventing something, but half the time was spent building it. And then the other half of the time was just kind of calibrating it so it could put out halfway decent prints. So I think I found outlets like that. But, another one is after 6 years in Dalia, in the classroom and being tech facilitator there, I moved to the district office as the technology coordinator for the district. And that gave me a lot of opportunities for creative problem solving, not of the same, maybe urgency as the Apollo 13 things, but certainly things like, hey, we've got this situation and here's what we have. We only have these things. Here are the limitations. We can't do this. We can't do that because of whatever parameters. How are we going to make this work? And we encountered a lot of those. One that I would maybe highlight is, right now our students walk around campus and we've got a really nice Wi-Fi system that's very device friendly. It's beautifully set up. If you look at the actual devices, they're enterprise grade devices. It's great, but that's not how we started. Saudi Aramco Expatriate Schools was a little bit late to the one-to-one game. And one of the challenges there was around network access. And we had both kind of the corporate considerations on data protection and tracking access and the different requirements they had. And then also just the pace. Aramco is a very methodical company, with lots of control, so they don't do things really fast. And so, knowing that we probably had a 2-year time frame before we were going to get something that was like enterprise grade ready, and were we ready to wait 2 more years? And we kind of decided no. So how are we going to do it? And we, across all of the campuses, we used open source software coupled with, they're called E900s. We were buying them off the shelf at Jarir for under 100 rials a pop. And we would wipe them clean and install a Linux operating system on them and integrate them with our open source proxy servers. And we had a row of computers here that were serving as the proxy servers. And it worked pretty well. It worked surprisingly well for sort of how MacGyver it was. But we got through with that for 2 years, and we were doing map testing on it. And so, people, as they were bringing their students in with laptops, and we were able to get that going, it was a really good feeling just knowing the creative team that I was working with and the problems we solved. And I think that that was kind of an Apollo 13. No one's life was at stake, but there were things that were at stake. We wanted to be able to move forward and give the best experience we could for our students. And we found a way to do it that matched all the parameters and the guidelines. We didn't cut corners, but we were doing it with E900s and duct tape and Linux routers. So yeah, it was a real success story and one of the highlights of I think that engineering spirit that I like to think I still have.
When you were back in the States and you met Crystal, and did you always know that you wanted to again go international, or was it something that just kind of came up and you jumped onto an opportunity? How did that come where you decided to come back to Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't think I always knew. I think when you're mid-20s, you probably don't really know anything, right? In a lot of ways, you're just kind of taking the days as they come, and of course, being a new teacher, right? It's such a demanding time because you don't really have a sense of what needs a lot of attention and what doesn't. And so, at least for me, I ended up putting a lot of attention on everything, and was kind of running myself ragged. And so it was after working at the school. It was a boarding school in Minnesota. It was after working there for several years where, we would teach during the day, and then, the evenings tended to be pretty full because you're working in a boarding school environment. And then the very, very late evenings, I'm trying to get ready for the next day. And it was a lot to sustain. And we got to the point where we were thinking, is this really what we're going to stick with? Of course, there were people who had been at the school for 30, 40 years. So some people did it, but we started asking ourselves, is that our story? I'd been living in the United States then through my university and a little time after that, and then several years of teaching. So that was a long time to be somewhere. I still knew people. My parents were still back here at the time. They were just getting ready to retire, but they said, Saudi Aramco is always hiring teachers. And so I talked to my old industrial arts teacher, who at the time was the technology coordinator, a job I would later have. And he advised us to take a look. So we looked internationally, and Saudi Arabia was not kind of at the top of our list. I knew for Crystal, just being a woman in Saudi Arabia at the time isn't for everyone. Has some constraints that you've got to be open to. It's great experiences, but it's also something that takes some getting used to, right? So it wasn't necessarily at the top of our list, but when we went to a job fair in Iowa, it was between that and a school in Thailand that was just opening, and we went with Saudi Aramco, and we said we were going to try it for a couple of years, and then if we didn't like it, we wouldn't get stuck here, and we would go and
Famous last
see
lines,
other
right?
places.
We'll just be in it for a couple of
Yeah,
years.
but from the very outset, I just loved it. I was hired as a math teacher, and when I arrived in Italia, and I just finished my university program, so I arrived in Italy in May because they were ready to bring me on just as soon as I was ready, and I wasn't under contract anywhere. And so Crystal followed about 6 weeks later after she finished her contract. But I arrived in May, which back then with the school year and the intersession, our school year is to go until the end of July. So this was only about, a little more than halfway through the school year. So there was still a lot of time left. I guess a little more than half, but there's still a lot of time left in the year. And it was when I met the principal on day one that I found out I was going to be the technology facilitator. And I was like, oh, okay, fair enough. This is cool. But that's one of the things that I appreciated from the outset is the trajectory I've had through Saudi Aramco has given me routinely fresh vistas to explore. And so even though I worked here 23 years, which can sound like I'm in a rut, I've never really felt that. I've always felt, even when I was technology coordinator for, I guess that was 15 years, I feel like within that, I had several different jobs depending on what the nature of the needs were. That when I first came in, everything was locked down. It was handled by IT, and we only worried about educational technology. And then you have the cyber attack, and now information protection and cybersecurity is really important. That's kind of a new job. We were building our own networks. That became a new job. We were hosting our own information systems. That became a new job. So I always felt that there was always something new, and every 5 years or sometimes more frequently, I would get put into a position where I would feel like I'm a novice again, and I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing, and just keep me in that learning mode, which I think is really, really at least important for me with engagement, is to feel like I've got a real good challenge in front of me, and that it's not rote work or anything like that. So it's been a great trajectory. I think there maybe are some people with Saudi Aramco who sort of get stuck here because of the financial package, or they want to make sure that they're meeting other goals. But for me, I don't know that figured into it. I think the quality of the work environment and the quality of the colleagues I've had has been really what's driven me over the years, and has just kept me so excited about working here.
Those 23 years have been filled with so many experiences. Is there one experience, whether professional or personal, that really sticks out to you?
So 23 years. Yeah, that's a long time. So, both my children were born here. And, I think for people who start families, those are really, especially your first child is a real important milestone. A lot of things change. And so those really stand out, where my life changed, and I went from being kind of a husband as my identity to a father, still a husband, but suddenly that father comes in, and that's an important one. So I think that is a pretty important one. If we think about education role, there's probably a few things. I don't know if this is true of everyone, but I could probably point to a few kind of pivotal moments that were really important for me, even though at the time they might have seemed a little bit small. And one I might share happened in Italy, and this was I hadn't been here that long, and I was tech facilitator at Italia, but I also was teaching the 8th and ninth grade mathematics. So I was in the classroom as well. And the math textbook they had was pretty reading intensive. And I hadn't experienced that before. Math textbooks I'd used before had problem sets and, some example problems worked out. But they didn't have paragraphs of text that were meant to be consumed. So it was a little bit new and interesting to me. But it felt compelling. And so I dove in and I thought, well, I'm gonna lean into this and make reading part of this instruction. So they had some vocabulary words were bolded, and I asked the students to take the bold vocabulary words as part of their homework, and they would write those down and kind of define the words, make sure they had pulled those out. And I was pretty chuffed with myself. I thought, look at me trying something new. And the curriculum coordinator at the time stopped by for a visit. And naturally, me being chuffed when they came in, I showed them what I was doing with reading, and they were actually thoroughly unimpressed. And they said to me, she said, "Well, the good news is you're not hurting anyone. You're not doing any harm." And I remember it was almost a little bit like a slap. It was like, wait a second. I went from being chuffed to something that kind of felt like a rebuke, and it wasn't. She said it kindly, but it wasn't the script I was ready for. The script I was ready for was, "Wow, Ben, that's great. That's excellent. You're trying something new." And so I had to think on that just a little bit, and then I ended calling her back and saying, "Okay, so how should I be doing it?" And she gave me some tips around helping students read, and I started using the SQ3R model of the survey, question, read, recite, review, and it really did make a difference. And the reason that that's transformative is it was one of the first times where someone gave me the gift of knocking me out of both my comfort zone, but also kind of the prison of my own experience, that I had experienced math education a certain way. When I went to teacher preparation in university program, it kind of reinforced that. And I never really thought critically about it very much. And so I was just repeating those things. And it was the first thing that sort of nudged me out of that. And I could step back and sort of look at the practice. So that was an incredible gift. And I think that idea of being able to step out of your practice, not be attached to it, and be ready to let it go and try something else if that something else proves to be better, of that always being open to a better mousetrap, I think has really made all the difference for me over the years. The other insight that I had not too long after, when my eyes opened up a bit more to some of the craft of teaching, not so much the content of teaching, but the craft of teaching, was elementary classroom teachers had such deep craft in Udalia. It just blew me away. The next year I got put on an accreditation study with an elementary literacy team, and I came out of each of those just with pages of notes, and I would take that back, whether it was anecdotal records or different approaches. Yeah, it was really amazing when I sort of went outside of math instruction and started looking at everyone else's craft and seeing the transferability. That was great. So I think those are some of the professional ones that were really transformative. And I think even though in the moment they were pretty small and I didn't recognize the impact they would have, over the last 23 years, I keep going back to those things. And that one comment that curriculum coordinator made that nudged me outside my comfort zone, really has had huge echoes. And I don't think probably either one of us recognized it.
What I appreciate about your story is how long ago that happened, and it was obviously impactful because you're still thinking about it today. So that's very cool. When I don't know if you do a gratitude kind of practice, or if sometimes you just think about gratitude, what are some things in your life that you seem to always kind of come back to and be grateful for?
Yeah, well, I'll be honest, I'm grateful for Aramco. Both growing up, I think Aramco afforded me an excellent education for one, but also a wonderful environment to grow up in. a very safe, open kind of free range environment within the camp. But that I think I'm very grateful for, and then it was grateful for that for my own children to have that same experience of just children being able to be children out in the evening. We used to say to our kids, "Be back at dark o'clock," and they could run around the neighborhood, and we didn't have to worry. Aramco in its investment in me, Aramco in the sport for my family, Aramco in the environment, both my parents that I experienced as a child, but then as an employee. So definitely grateful for that. I'm grateful for the people that I've worked with. One of the things I share, fairly often, I think, because I think it's striking, is that I think every year I've worked in Saudi Aramco, I felt like this is the best group of people I have ever worked with in my career. And I've never spent a year thinking, 5 years ago, that was a great team. It's always felt like, wow, this just keeps getting better and better. And so I'm really deeply grateful for that. The ability to travel, I think, is wonderful. The ability to have security, that we've got a wonderful home in the United States that we don't feel compelled to rent out or anything like that. It's just there. When we get some time off, we get to go there and be at our happy place by the lake. And that's not something that I think every educator can afford, that kind of thing. So really grateful for that, in so many ways, professionally, in terms of the environment, in terms of the people I work with. I really feel like I won the lottery.
You sound like you've maintained such a heart for people living within a transient community, which can sometimes be very difficult because people are coming and going. How have you done that, being able to, loved and lost and continue to love? And what daily habits maybe do you have that allows you to continue having a heart for people, even though, love and loss have existed?
That's an interesting question. I think being present is a big one. I think having good work in front of you is important for that as well. Keeps you from thinking too much about the people who aren't there, I think. So I think that's important. I think another one is always thinking about people's perspective. I think I do that quite a fair bit with the people I work with. And I think about, how are they seeing this right now? What are they seeing as the beneficial outcome? Just trying to put myself in their shoes, I think, has been helpful. But, when you raise the idea of transients and people coming and going, one of the nice things about Aramco is I think it's a bit more stable than a lot of environments, which has been nice. But in some ways, that only makes it harder when someone you've worked with, say, for 8 years or 10 years leaves. So that does make it difficult sometimes. But I think having good work in front of you and having faith in the people around you and being able to lean on each other is what makes for a good work environment, and I think helps navigate those pieces. The other one that's kind of nice is in today's age of social media and other ways, like it's, people aren't gone in the same sort of way. It's a lot easier to sort of stay in touch with people and stay connected. Even if it's somewhat passive, where you kind of seeing what's going on in their lives on Facebook, you still kind of feel a connection there. So I think that helps with some of those, when you mentioned kind of love and loss, that, if you think 20 years ago where those things weren't available and things maybe had more of a finality to them. And now it changes to a different rhythm because there's so many digital tools to stay in touch with people.
We've talked a lot about kind of like your past and where you've come from. My question is, what is in the future? What is some hopeful dreams, aspirations, goals, ideas about what's to come?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Well, I'm, just probably not even 2 months into the new role officially. And so, in a lot of ways, I'm still getting my feet under me, even though I'm not new to Saudi Aramco. It's a different level, and there's a I would say my core team is different now. Before, my core team all worked for SAES, and now a lot of my core team works in HR, and so I need to rely on them to help get things done, and then they rely on me for help they need. So that's new. So that puts me back in the novice mode there. Again, there's a lot of constituencies that I was sort of aware of, but wasn't as responsible for. And so, one of the things is just making sure that I can keep my feet under me and make sure that Saudi Aramco Expatriate Schools continues to return the value for Saudi Aramco that has sustained the amazing investment that Saudi Aramco has made in SAES that has benefited the students certainly and the families. But I also think that it benefits the community overall, that it's a really positive influence on the community when you've got a great school in there, even if you might be a family where your children are outside of SAES range, or maybe you might not have that. I think it uplifts the social fabric of the community. And that's something I'm eager to sustain, because I think that the investment that Saudi Aramco has made in SAES over the past 80 or so years has really returned dividends. And one of my primary goals is to make sure we continue to shine a spotlight on that value, and we continue to keep our eye on that value, so that we can sustain this great support and great resource for our students and our families.
I wonder, with AI and technology and all those aspects, what do you see as far as education in the future, and how is it going to look?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. AI, when that was probably only November, so a year ago, when I first started dabbling with some generative AI, or some of the AI image generators that were just starting to come out. And when you think about, first of all, how amazing it was when you first tucked into that, but then how far it's come in just a year is really mind blowing. With that said, I've worked in educational technology a long time, and we've seen things come through, whether it's access to the internet in a classroom is just going to change things, and it's going to be a game changer, or mobile computing, or one-to-one laptop environments. There's been Web 2.0 and the idea of social. There's been all of these things that at the time made people really nervous, and then had other people like, this is a game changer, this is going to change education. And I've seen a lot of those come through. I remember there was his kind of own job description was futurist. It was a presentation at a NISA conference it was my very first NISA conference in 2000. He said, in 20 years, we will not recognize schools. They will look totally different. It's going to, the way technology is changing now is going to revolutionize everything, including schools. And there were a lot of people like, yeah, that's totally right. But I don't think it really did, right? I think you can walk onto this campus and people want to feel like they belong. They want a human connection. People need to be social to learn. A lot of those kind of fundamentals don't change. So if I had a rule of thumb when one of those things comes along, those big game changers, is that it probably won't catch on as fast as some people think, and it won't be as transformative as some people maybe fear. And over time, as people feel like it makes sense to them, they will begin to use it in logical ways. And I think that's held for, most everything. And even though AI, I think, is one of the bigger ones, right? If you're just thinking about waves, this is maybe a really big wave. But I think that's the same thing, is that it won't be maybe as disruptive as some people fear. And it won't be as transformative as maybe some people hope. And that over time, people are going to find ways to use it that make sense to them and make them better. So when I hear comments about, jobs being replaced and so on, it's a real thing. There's a lot of industries that have had that disruption of jobs. I think education has largely resisted that because of the human nature of it. And no one has really kind of cracked the challenge. If you look at it from an economics perspective, the challenge is how do you break out of the 20-to-1 ratio for a quality experience that students learn in and that parents are happy with. And if someone solves that, then economically, they're going to disrupt the environment. And AI maybe has some things there, particularly in skill acquisition, where you can have really, really individualized learning with that. And for the human side of it, I don't know that I've really seen that. I think that people will still want to talk to people. And but when you think about, maybe some of the lower level skills, even if they're very complicated, the lower level skills will either become trivial because, you can ask your AI assistant that responds to voice commands in the room, or if they're non-trivial, that an AI can teach them. So I think there will be some kind of shifting there. But and I think language arts teachers are really feeling it now because it kind of calls into account the nature of writing. But as a math teacher, I think in math instruction, we went through this maybe years ago with the introduction of calculators and people saying this is just changing what mathematics is. And the reality is it just let you focus on a different kind of mathematics, and you could focus more on application and reasoning, and you didn't have to spend as much time on just the calculation operation. And then language arts and writing teachers were not impacted by the calculators, but now here's a tool that is impacting them, and it will. But I think my own take on it is it's worth keeping an eye on because it's absolutely fascinating. I love playing around with generative AI, especially the image generators. They blow me away. But I think it's not going to be as bad as people fear, and it's probably not going to be as good as people hope. But it's going to make life better, and people are going to find ways to use it that make sense.
Ben, you have been so generous with your time. I want to thank you for all this. I have one more question to wrap this up. Just helping us get to know you better. Who is somebody that you admire?
That's an interesting one. Who is someone that I admire? Well, I think there's a lot of people I admire. I admire, I think, everyone who's helped me. And I think for a lot of people who have helped me, they maybe didn't even know it. I think there's a tenet in a lot of, maybe Eastern philosophies that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. That when you're ready to learn a lesson, the universe will present it to you. And so, I think if I would pull someone out there was a dean of students when I was in boarding school who really held me to high standards, but he also put me in some challenging roles. So he had selected me to be a proctor in the dorm, which is kind of a dorm leadership position. And I was pretty withdrawn. I was shy. I continued to be an introvert person. I definitely skew on that side of the curriculum or in the continuum. But he saw something. I don't know that a lot of people would have saw a good fit in that, but he did and sort of gave me that chance. And that made a world of difference to me in the opportunities. And I think I've had a whole string of those across my life of people who maybe took a chance on me. And so Henry Cataldo was his name. And he was a pretty kind of gruff kind of person. You had to warm up to him a little bit, but he had an absolute heart of gold. And he was one of the first people that in my mind, my adolescent brain that was still developing, like had this cognitive realization that this is a person, this is an adult who's taking a chance on me because they see something. And then that made me want to live up to that. And so I think that idea of seeing those things in people, I admire that. And I did have a chance to talk with him because later I went and worked at the same school and I was his colleague. So I did get the chance to share some of the impact he had with me, thankfully. But I think for a lot of people, we just don't know the impact that we're having on other people. And so, I don't always do it, but I do try to aspire to just treat relationships and interactions thoughtfully, because you never really know where people are ready for the universe to give them a lesson. And if you're going to be the person that does that, you want it to be a good one.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, this has been so wonderful to get to know you. I feel like I've known you for a couple of years, but actually I didn't know a lot about you. So this has been super interesting, and we really, really appreciate your time. I know you have got a very busy schedule, so thank you so much for meeting with us.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Just to Know You.
We would like to thank our amazing tech man, Mr. Kent Arimura, Sterling McDonald for the podcast music, and the SAES community. See you next time.
If you know anyone who you think has a great story to tell, we would love to hear about it. Please send an email to either Angela, Darian, or Kent.